Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz keyboardist Robert Walter of the Greyboy Allstars. We talked in early August 2020 about the new CD they have coming out, Como De Allstars, and this odd new COVID-19 world. Robert is well-versed in soul jazz on the Hammond B3 and Fender Rhodes, and he's a founding member of this outfit. He talked about his career, the group, what's going on these days, what might be next, and so much more. It's a great story. Enjoy.
Hey, thanks for taking a minute out. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, of course.
I love the music. In fact, we just because of the pandemic, we got a pool in our backyard, and it's been the perfect soundtrack to be outside in the water. This goes without saying. We're obviously in the middle of quite a thing here in the world, and you have an album that's new now that's coming out during a pandemic. Before we actually get into the artistic construction of this particular project, talk to me about any ambivalence, any thoughts about releasing this during such a crazy period on the planet.
Well, you know, we had this, we had the record prepared before any of this happened, and we had been waiting really for a time where everyone could tour at the same time, and you know, trying to plan the release that way. And you know, we were listening to the mix, and you know, I think everybody in the group kind of thought at the same time, you know, why don't we just put this out now? It seems to be music that makes sense at this moment. It offers some levity. It feels good. It's like fun to listen to. And rather than wait for a whole another year to put it out when we can tour on it, we thought, well, you know, let's do this. It's sort of a untraditional model because usually you want to tour to support your album. But I just thought that the music made sense for right now. We didn't want to delay it any longer. So that's why we put it out when we did.
But isn't there a set, I mean, like, the whole thing about this pandemic is that if we didn't have the arts, between music, visual arts, movies, and TV, these times would have been way darker than they are now. So, you know, when we talk about essential frontline workers, I'm not taking anything away from first responders and all of that, but, man, artists need some kind of credence paid to them for doing what they've done during this time.
Sure. I mean, I have a big record collection, and that's been getting me through this in a lot of ways. And you know, watching old films and all these things that, you know, you start to realize what an important part of your life they are. And then the absence of live music, it makes you miss that even more than, you know, I take it for granted sometimes because I'm touring all the time and going all these places. But it's definitely been a strange year just missing that.
So the one thing that's great about you guys is that you have probably one of the more unique sounds in this entire genre, so to speak. And just in general, you have a great melding of different feelings that go into your music. A little bit about your beginnings. Where were you born and raised, and how did you get, you know, pulled into this music world?
I grew up in San Diego, California. I guess it's true of all the guys in Greyboy Allstars except for Carl, who grew up just a little bit north in Santa Ana, California. So we're all like Southern California kids. And my parents were like hippies into the Grateful Dead. So I grew up around music. My dad was a musician actually, and we had a lot of albums, but you know, it was a lot of like psychedelic rock music and sort of that 60s stuff. My mom was really into Bob Dylan, so I grew up loving all this music. My dad did have a couple of interesting records that were sort of outside that. He had a Ramsey Lewis record, he had a 1 Meters record, he had Herbie Hancock's Thrust, and these things, for some reason I was just drawn to them. And as I got older, became more interested in Black American music and funk music and jazz and rhythm and blues and all of that. So that sort of like became a fascination. And by the time Greyboy Allstars started, you know, the group was started sort of around the DJ culture, and we got into collecting these records, and we had discovered all this great like funky jazz records basically from the late 60s and early 70s, and that became a big influence.
So how did the name come about? I always forget to ask these very on the surface questions, but how did the name of the group come about?
So the group is actually named, well, it's a little complicated. There's a DJ in San Diego, DJ Greyboy, who the band was formed originally to play a record release party for his album. You know, Carl Denson, our saxophone player, is on that album, but the rest of the group was not. It was like a melding of hip hop and jazz. So he would make beats, and then people would play improvised solos over him. That's the album, Freestyling. And the group was formed just as we were supposed to play his release party. He's like, instead of just DJing, I'd like have a band play these tunes and then maybe play some covers I picked. So the whole band was just formed for that one gig, and it was called the Greyboy Allstars. We had so much fun, even at the rehearsal before the gig, but then at that first show that we thought maybe we'll keep doing it, and it kind of just snowballed from there, and it had its own momentum. So, and then DJ Greyboy did produce our first couple of records, and he came back and worked with us on What Happened to Television. We're still friends with him. We're still in interaction. But so that's where the name came from.
Very cool. So what year did you guys get together?
The end of '93.
Okay, so you guys have been around a lot.
It's been, like 26 years, something like that.
Yeah, it's wild. Well, and I'm kind of a product of that whole '90s thing. I mean, I'm up there in my 40s, so when I think about the '90s, I'm like, yeah, that wasn't long ago. And then I kind of realized it was a lot longer than I thought.
I've been realizing that a lot of my musical heroes, like Fred Wesley, who played on our first album, and like the guys from the Meters, when I met them in my early 20s, they were about my age now. So
wow.
Now I've become the older generation. And when I was a kid, I looked up to those guys like, oh my God, they've been doing this for so long and they're so great at it. So you just kind of time keeps moving,
Yeah. Well, it's weird. I was in a gas station yesterday, and I was talking to someone about the pandemic or whatever, and she just kind of stopped and said, when we were kids, they said we wouldn't even live this long. And I was like, you know what? They kind of did. I mean, we're really kind of on borrowed time as humanity right now. I don't want to be focused on COVID, but I think it's an interesting tapestry just because it's timely. And my question is, there was that moment in 9/11 when everybody was like, oh, I know exactly where I was at when that airplane hit the tower. Now we're going to have this new dialogue that's going to rotate around early to mid-March. Like, when as a band did you guys start seeing these dominoes fall and you guys were like, oh, man, this is not good, we're going and shut down? When did all that begin?
We were actually on a little mini tour, like it was like really a long weekend up in the Bay Area. And there had been talk already about this going around, and was it, this is long before things shut down, but there was some thought of, how safe are these gigs? Should we be careful about, being in small spaces, even with each other? We'd all been traveling a lot. So that's when we first started thinking about it, and no one knew it would become what it is now. But we were together as a band when that started being discussed.
So what is it about you guys? It's very obvious, and I've listened to a lot of your music. It's very obvious that you all are not only having a conversation, but you're having side conversations that come together and cajole very well together. What is it about you guys as artists and creators and as a unit that works so well that makes this music just sound right sonically?
It's interesting because we come from fairly different backgrounds. I mean, there's one thing we all have in common, and that's a love for this sort of genre, even the sort of the larger thing of, I don't know what you would call it, but, that intersection between improvised music and danceable music, and really sort of a set of records from the late 60s and early 70s that we particularly love. A bunch of that Prestige and Blue Note, mainly organ records recorded by Rita Van Gelder, where they were using rhythms from funk music and popular soul songs, but they were great improvisers too, so they blended that along with the Meters, James Brown, Curtis Mayfield, all of that sort of movement. But other than that, we had all had different influences. I think there's something interesting about it's kind of like a bunch of different takes upon that music. So there's enough, people are bringing enough of their own flavor to it to keep it interesting. It's not just a purist, imitative thing. It's more like everybody's take on this thing. Our guitar player is a great songwriter, and I was more interested in New Orleans funk music, and Carl was more of a jazz musician. And so all these things sort of bring something to it. And it was from the first time we played, like we walked into the rehearsal place, started to play the first song. There was something about it where we were all laughing, and it just connected in some way. There's some kind of great, chemistry. Some of that stuff I think is just magical, like it's in the ether. Who knows why it works? But there's some combinations of people that just have a thing, and this one did from the beginning, and it kind of still stays there. Like it always surprises me. This band doesn't work that often, so we'll lay off for a year sometimes, and they come back together. It takes like 2 shows, and then it starts gelling again.
The one thing about this absence of live music, I'm not a performer, so I can't understand the pangs. I mean, I think there's a part of this from an economic standpoint and just the logistics, that there's a lot of people out there that are just in a world of not knowing where this is all going to pick up. But on a more logistical standpoint, you've had months off and there's months ahead. Are there any live moments, any magic moments, any tour moments, anything that you remember that's really keeping you positive and keeping you going right now that you've experienced on stage with this band?
I mean, honestly, since this thing tends to, it's problematic scheduling-wise and things like that, but there's not, the music always works. And I just think about those last gigs. I mean, those were the last gigs I played before all of this. And I like that the recent ones were great, too. So I sort of just think about, like, that last moment, and I know it's still there when we come back because this one always works. You know what I mean?
So for you yourself, what do you like the best about being a musician?
Well, one of the things that we're missing now is I love the travel of it, and that you're in different places every day, and you interact with different people, and you get to check out the town and the food and the culture in different parts of the country. I always enjoyed that. And I like being in an improvising group because every night's sort of an adventure, and you can discover something about yourself. You can push it in different directions. It's I don't think I would enjoy working as a musician where you play the same set list every night the same way, like in a pop group kind of sense. There's some satisfaction in just doing that really, it's real tight and really together. But I feel like I want to walk away from each night having learned something. So I like the exploratory nature of bands that improvise.
What was the first live jazz show you ever saw that made you think, man, this is something I'd like to do with my life?
I'm not sure. Trying to think of like a jazz performance. I thought Tony Williams played when I was really young, and enjoyed that, and I could tell that they were stretching and that it was different. I used to go see a lot of blues things, like I used to go see Stevie Ray Vaughan and the Discovered Thunderbirds back in the day, who are not jazz artists by any means, but they were improvising. You could tell that when they passed around solos, it wasn't the same thing every night. Interesting things were happening. I probably got some of this from my parents and their, love of like sort of psychedelic music, and that was changing every night. So, and jazz per se has not always been my biggest influence, although it is part of the mix of things. I always like where jazz intersects with the other musics. I don't even like to think about it as one genre or another. There's sort of a greater thing of American music and what we're doing here. I always loved the Meters, and I used to go see the Neville Brothers back in the day. I always loved that. So, things like that.
So if you could get into a time machine with the band and you guys could go back and see a band and maybe hang out afterwards and talk to them, or a performer, who do you think that would be?
Well, I would probably see James Brown back in the day, like, early 70s. I don't know that I'd want to hang out with James. I think he was a difficult person by a lot of accounts. I would probably like to meet Curtis Mayfield, because he's just always had such a heavy, like, spiritual vibe to me, and seems like a kind and thoughtful person, and he's a big inspiration.
You all come to Kansas City and play after this pandemic's over. And you kind of have to write up a notice or kind of give some kind of heads up as to what kind of show you perform live. You're coming here to present this album. What's the show going to be like for you guys live?
Well, we change the set list every night, and it all depends on what we're doing. If we're out promoting an album, we usually favor some of that music and, of course, play some new stuff. But some nights, if we're tired enough of it, we don't exactly do that. There's a sort of a larger body of work. It's music from all of our albums, music by artists that have influenced us, things that we just like to play. So the set lists are highly varied, and we could probably play for, a lot of a week and not really repeat stuff. So, and then within that, all the tunes are interpreted in different ways. So it's really a thing that kind of happens in the moment. It is all funky and it's all improvisational. So those are the things that keep it going. But yeah, the set lists are, it's a variety of music, and it's usually a mixture of some classic things that we're influenced by and our own tunes.
So, everyone that's probably seen you live or has been fans for all these years know you all and this idea of you guys being this band and this outfit. What do you think that fans probably don't realize about you guys? Something that you guys are and what you embody, and maybe people just don't know that about you?
I'm not sure how people perceive it. It's an interesting thing that we don't work all the time, and we're all doing different things, but we're also all working together in different ways all the time. So the thing is, it's part of the idea of the Greyboy Allstars is there was going to be a record label, Greyboy Records, and we were kind of modeling it after those old jazz records, where like on Prestige Records, you hear a record by Velvet Sparks and Rusty Bryan might play on it, or Leon Spencer might play on it, and then you listen to the other guy's album. The other guys were so it's like a larger collective of people, and different people were coming out as leaders, and it's really like an all-star group. That was it was sort of tongue-in-cheek at the time because no one had heard of any of us. We were all-stars, but as we've grown, I think it's become that because everyone started their own careers and everyone does solo things and works in different arenas, and then we come together, and there's all this stuff that always feed the creativity because we come together with different experiences. It's not like the five of us in a band and all together all the time that we've seen all the same things. I think it enriches the music because we have these varied experiences.
Hey, man, thank you for taking some time to open up about the band today. Good luck with the album. Stay safe out there.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks. Great talking to you.
Thanks for listening and tuning into another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Robert for his time, music, and stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.